Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Sheldon-Fell, and this is Moments of Hope at the International Grief Institute. Tonight, we are talking about traumatic sibling loss, and our guest is Dr. Heidi Horsley. Heidi is the co-founder of Open to Hope Foundation. She serves on the national board of the Compassionate Friends, and she also teaches at Columbia University a class called Traumatic Loss During Childhood, and she's a clinical psychologist. So welcome to the show, Heidi.
Thanks, Linda. It's great to be here, and I am talking about my favorite topic. So I appreciate you building awareness for sibling loss, because we need to build more awareness for what's unique and different about our loss versus other losses out there. So thank you.
Right. And you know, sibling loss is not talked about enough. And then add in the component of traumatic sibling loss. Right. And, it's really, really important. And so, today is actually the 35th anniversary of you having a traumatic sibling loss. You lost your brother Scott in 1983. He was 17 years old and he died in a car accident. And so first off, I'm terribly sorry for your loss, but I appreciate you being here tonight, 35 years later, sharing your experience and your wisdom with people, our viewers. So thank you so much. How has your grief changed in the 35 years? I think that would be my first question.
Well, it's changed a lot, because I'm here as a way to pay tribute and honor and celebrate my brother's life. And that wasn't always the case. 35 years ago, my brother and cousin were driving together in Washington, D.C. They were both 17, Matthew and Scott. Matthew, my cousin, was driving the car. It was raining. The car was on a bridge abutment. It hydroplaned. It hit the side of the bridge and it blew up. So both the boys died immediately, and they died very traumatically. And I actually did not know how I was going to survive. And I didn't even want to. My brother was my everything. He was my go-to guy. He was larger than life when he was here. I have two sisters, and he was like the boy in the sea of girls. And we loved and adored him. And I didn't know how I was going to do life without him. So it was very, very traumatic initially.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 20 years old. I had a 19-year-old sister. I still have her. My brother was 17, and my youngest sister was 14. So
you were in college?
I was in college when my brother died. And it was hard, and it was really hard. And it was weird going home, because I kept expecting him for a very long time to answer the door. I just couldn't believe that a 17-year-old in the prime of his life could suddenly be gone. It just didn't even it felt like it was surreal. It didn't feel like that could have happened in the prime of his life, and very physically fit and healthy, and he's an athlete. And it was hard to really realize the permanence of it for a long, long time.
And so when you were in college, you already had this future that you envisioned.
Right.
And, your sibling is the keeper of your childhood memories. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly your future is without that keeper of your memories. Those memories moving forward will no longer have that sibling in them. And so with that being such a profound impact, did it change the course of your college career?
It totally changed everything. After Scott died, I felt like there was no point in being in college. I grew up in New York. I was at school at University of Utah at that point. And I dropped out of school and moved to New York City for a little bit to be closer to my family. Mm. And after about a year, I realized I didn't want to be close to my parents, because they were grieving, and it was such a burden for me to take care of them, that I moved to Southern California. And I'd never been there in my life.
Really?
I got in the car and I drove there. And my dad was like, "What are you doing? What if you don't like it?" And I said, "I'll step on the accelerator and leave. I have to find out why I'm still on the earth. I have to find out what is my meaning, what is my purpose, and why am I still here? Because I honestly don't know." So
did you have survivor's guilt?
I felt like the wrong child died. My brother was extremely kind, extremely funny, extremely popular. I don't want to paint a saint, but I swear to God he was. He was the quarterback of the varsity football team. He was the catcher of the varsity baseball team. He was a starter on the varsity basketball team. He was most valuable player. Everybody loved him. I was a very average person. I mean, I was fine, but I mean, he was just everything in our family. And I felt like, here, my only brother, the only boy in our family dies, and there's 3 living daughters. My dad has no brothers alive because my dad lost his brother at birth. So I just felt like my brother was the family name. He was everything. He was going to, you know, be the family Horsley. And I felt like the wrong child died. And I felt a lot of guilt about being the one that was still here. Yes.
Really? How long did you feel that way?
20 years. And I will tell you something, Linda, that probably shocks people, but it wasn't. It was getting around other bereaved siblings and having them tell me over and over and over how they felt like the wrong child died and how they had survivor guilt, how they couldn't tell anybody about it because they were too embarrassed and shamed about it. That was what helped me to heal. Because I realized it was a common experience with siblings. It's a very common experience.
That is profound. That is really profound. And so thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that very much. So, you know, with your parents, you talked about feeling like, you know, you were caring for them during that initial first year. And we know that grief doesn't end at the first year. It's just beginning. But during that first year, did you feel like you had to brush your own grief under the rug because attention was all on them?
Yes, 100%. I felt like it was a double loss. I felt like I had not only lost my brother, but I had lost the parents I once knew. I had lost the family I once knew. My parents I'd never, ever seen them so vulnerable. I'd never seen my father so destroyed, ever. I'd never seen them so sad. And I felt like I had to be the strong one. I had to hide my emotions. I had to hide what was going on because I needed to take care of them. And that was fine for about a year. And after about a year, I realized that I wasn't thinking about my own loss at all. I had shelved it. And that was when I decided I needed to move away from them because I couldn't be their therapist anymore. Even though I wasn't a therapist, I couldn't be listening for hours and hours and hours about how horrible it was to lose a child. Because I was 21 at that point, and I needed to be a 21-year-old. I needed to have a life. And
so you gave yourself permission to get up and leave, which takes a lot of courage. And so when you drove to California, did you find that you were starting your own grief journey at ground zero?
Absolutely. I went on a program called Colorado Outward Bound right before I left for California. And my dad gave me a book called Man's Search for Meaning as I was getting on the airplane. And it's basically a book about how Viktor Frankl survives the Holocaust and watches his entire family dies. And he lives and he creates meaning and purpose in this amazing book out of it. So the takeaway for me was, if this guy can figure out how to live, despite the fact that he's lost everybody in the Holocaust, I'm going to be able to figure it out how to live after my brother and cousin die. And the other takeaway from it for me was that in that book, there's a lot of quotes by Nietzsche. And one is, he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. So in the book, there's a lot of talk about we have to find our reason for being here. We have to find our purpose. And once we find our why, the everyday how is not going to be as hard. So I knew when I was out in California, when I got off the Outward Bound, and my brother had been on it the year before actually, and I moved to California, I said, I am not going to leave California till I figure out why I'm on this earth, what my purpose is. Once I find my purpose, I will leave, but I will stay here until I figure it out. And I worked retail jobs and basically got into a very dark place and grieved heavily. And I was there for 3 years, and I figured out why I was here at the end of that point. During that point. So when you were in college at the time Scott died, what were you studying? What was your major? Fashion merchandising. I was a fashion person. And I did go back to New York, and I did an associate's degree from a little school called Toby Coburn in the Village in New York City. And I thought I'd had my whole life figured out before he died. And when he died, it derailed everything. I no longer cared about fashion. I didn't even care about wearing earrings anymore. I mean, it was just so life-changing. I thought, this is not why I'm here. I'm not here to figure out how to create fashion.
How to pair stilettos with a jacket or, yeah, right. So At what point did you decide to go into clinical psychology? And then at what point from that did you decide to focus on grief and bereavement and recovery from, or resiliency from?
I figured it out while I was in Southern California and reading all these existential books like Man's Search for Meaning, which was very life-changing. And at the end of that 3 years, I said, I am going to go back to school. I was still, in an undergrad. I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to learn everything I can professionally about traumatic loss, everything I can professionally about sibling loss, everything I can professionally about loss in general. I knew about it from my own personal standpoint, but I wanted to learn professionally so that I could help other people who didn't know how to survive and didn't think that they could. And that's what I did. I moved back to University of Utah, and after I got my undergrad, I got 2 masters and a doctorate. Everything I did was grief and loss related. Every class I could take, every internship I could take, every client I could have, I was very focused on the fact that this is what I wanted to do. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the sudden death of a sibling. I mean, that was the only reason I was there. So, is to figure it out so that I could help other people. And in the process, heal myself, which is
right. She who heals others heals herself.
Exactly.
So, in what ways for our viewers tonight, in what ways do traumatic loss differ from anticipatory loss? It's got its own dynamics, and that's the loss I know as well, having lost a daughter in a car accident, traumatic loss. And so for our viewers who are not sure, how would you explain the difference?
Well, there's a lot of controversy in the professional community about what is traumatic loss. First of all, I just want to say, some people feel that losing a child in their 20s or younger it constitutes a traumatic loss. I think it's our own perception. I mean, there's, academically, I can read what it is. It's I have it right here because, my students ask me this question. It's when a sudden, unexpected, overwhelming, intense blow or series of blows assaults a person from the outside. That's what it is. So when you're so blindsided and so unprepared and literally assaulted psychologically, emotionally, and physically by the impact of this loss, that is a traumatic loss. And the thing about traumatic losses is we have to deal with the trauma first before we can deal with the grief.
Okay.
So because, as you know, Linda, it's so traumatic to have somebody 1 second in your life and the next second at the prime of their lives gone, and gone traumatically, in a traumatic way.
Right. And, we don't compare losses. We don't compare griefs because each is unique as a fingerprint. And, no two are the same. But I know that when we lost our daughter, she was 15. I don't remember the first 2.5 years. I was in a fog. And it's someone that I know who also lost a child in a car accident. So she doesn't remember the first 6 years. And I think that's really important to talk about when talking about a traumatic loss is, you don't have that. We often think of it, we don't have that chance to say goodbye, but it's so much more than that. And I think it's really important to, talk about how trauma impacts our life. But, it brings up a bigger picture, and that is how trauma impacts us moving forward. It impacts our mental health and our physical health moving forward. What does research show about that?
Research shows that unresolved trauma, like you said, can lead to major health crisis. It can lead to behavioral problems. It can lead to relationship difficulties because sometimes we're afraid to get attached to another person because we're afraid they're going to die traumatically or suddenly. Because trauma usually involves a suddenness. So it impacts us in a lot of ways. And I remember, I worked with 9/11 firefighter families for 10 years after 9/11. I was living in San Francisco on 9/11 and moved back to New York City to work with the fire department for 10 years. But I remember working with an NYPD, a police, and he kept saying, Heidi, I don't have to give up my anger and I don't have to resolve anything, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember one night his gallbladder burst and he ended up almost dying because the trauma was just too intense and he didn't have healthy ways to let go of his trauma.
To process what had happened.
Exactly. Yes. Yep.
Oh my goodness. I think that's really important to talk about that, is that, the outlets that we allow ourselves for processing our grief and our loss. And when we are, when we don't allow ourselves to validate, it's going to come out in other ways, and unhealthy ways is usually that, because it has to come out somehow, right? And so, poor eating habits, or just that self-care goes right down the tube. So, going back to sibling loss, I think because sibling loss, no matter, what it stems from, trauma or, illness or what have you, I think to some degree, siblings feel like their grief is the last in the line of griefs. And so that can create what we call disenfranchised grief. Yes. What are your thoughts on that in relation to sibling loss?
Well, Dr. Kandoka coined the term disenfranchised grief, and I absolutely agree with this. And, we are always told that the worst death in the world is the death of a child. And when people hear that I've had a brother die, they always say, you've got to be strong for your parents. Or that must have been really hard on your parents. And it was really hard on my parents. And so, but what that does is that minimizes my loss, because now we're talking about my parents and how they're dealing with it and what's going on with them. So now when people say, wow, that must have been really hard on your parents, I now want to educate the world. So I usually say, yes, it was. And it's really hard on me too. It was very hard on all of us, because I want people to see that it's difficult for everybody. But there is this thing out there that the hardest death is the death of a child, and it does make siblings feel that we don't have the right to our grief, that we can't talk about our grief, that our grief is not as significant. Right. And when I worked with 9/11 siblings, I thought it was going to be different, because 9/11 was such an international tragedy. It was so public. It was not, every year on 9/11 down at the site, people read the names of everybody that died. It was not until year 5 that the siblings were allowed to read those names, because that is how minimized sibling loss is.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Sorry, I've got my little pet therapy dog here.
Oh, I love it. That's great. Dogs are really important.
He came in for a little bit of
show to us.
My therapy dog. She's everyone's therapy dog. So, that's really profound to think about. With 9/11, I appreciate you sharing that, because that was a case where the whole world grieved with these people, and yet for you, working with these families, what was that like for you? I would imagine that was triggering to some degree.
It was.
Or was it healing for you?
It was incredible for me. I wasn't in New York City on 9/11, and I think that was actually a good thing, because a lot of therapists that lived in New York, that worked at the site, that worked with the families, had their own stories of trauma, stories about the day, stories about having to escape or trying to find people. I didn't have a story. So I could go into New York City and I could just be there, and be there for people that needed to tell their stories, and everybody needed to tell their stories. And I lived in Midtown Manhattan, so there was just, the whole city was reeling for many, many years. It was incredible to watch the families for 10 years and to watch them and to be with them, kind of companioning with them, taking their hands from the darkness into the light, and watching them as they healed, and had to do it very publicly. So.
How do you reflect on that all these years later? If knowing what we know now about grief and resiliency, I tend to shy away from the word recovery, because grief is something that you absorb into your world and you carry it forward with you. And so resiliency is something that is important, right? That's how we rebound from it and rebuild ourselves. It's a self-rebuilding and moving forward with it. And so what we know now, what didn't you know then that you know now about traumatic grief and dealing with, especially with the mass casualty incident like that?
I didn't know that we didn't go in to see the families for 6 months, because everybody in the world was in New York City trying to help these families. They were coming in from all over the country, and it was overwhelming for the families. So we decided, we were a Columbia University research team. We decided we would wait 6 months to go to their homes and to start seeing them. When we got there at the 6-month mark, they only had one question to ask us, and it was, where the hell were you?
Oh my goodness.
They wanted us, day one, to help them navigate the media, the people hiding in their bushes, to navigate phone calls, to give them advice, to co-parent, because it was firefighters that died, to be there and take their hand at funerals, to be there as trusted advisors. They needed us from the very moment that it happened. They didn't need all these other people.
Right.
So what we learned is that it's never too soon to show up at someone's house after a traumatic loss. It's never too soon. Don't wait.
Wow.
Instead of sending a card, send yourself. That's the best gift you can give somebody.
My goodness. Wow.
So that's what I think was the biggest takeaway.
That's a big takeaway. That's a very good lesson to learn. Terrible way to learn it, but a good lesson to learn. So, and going back to sibling loss again, did you ever have, when you first lost your brother Scott, did you ever have feelings of feeling like you needed to forgive yourself? Were you angry at yourself, wishing that you hadn't have had that argument, or wish that you would have told him what a cool brother he was, or what comes up for a sibling?
Well, I never said I loved him, because I don't think I said I loved him before, but that wasn't the last thing I said to him before he died. And I think as siblings, a lot of times we don't say we love you. It's different than a parent relationship. So had I known I would never see him again, I would have told him I loved him. I didn't tell him that. I would have spent more time with him. I mean, we spent a lot of time together as siblings, but if someone had said to me, Heidi, at 17, your brother's going to die, I would have made an effort to spend a lot of time with them. I probably wouldn't have gone away to college. I probably would have stayed close to home. And we did fight, but for the most part, we didn't fight that much. So I didn't really have a lot of that stuff going on, although a lot of siblings do, and it's normal. I always say we invest negative energy in someone because we love them. If I never fight with you and I never disagree with you and I never have an argument with you, it's because I probably don't even care about you. So I think it's normal to have very complicated relationships with siblings. We try on different roles with siblings. There's our safe people. Yeah. So it can get very complicated, and it is hard when they die because we didn't realize it. And a lot of times there is unfinished business and things that we wish we had said to them, which is normal.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And so what do you want our viewers to know about sibling loss? How can we support bereaved siblings moving forward?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One is that our loss is really, really hard. I've never had a child die. I've never had a parent die, but I've had a brother die. That's the only thing I know. To me, it's the worst loss that's ever happened to me, ever. Because I don't know other losses. You can only know your own loss. And the worst loss that's happening to you is the one that's kicked you to the ground, the one where you don't know how you're going to survive. The other thing I would say to parents out there is don't worry for the most part if your kids aren't talking to you about the death. We don't talk to our parents oftentimes about the deaths. We don't want to upset them. We're trying to be good kids. My parents have been through so much that I didn't want to bring up Scott in front of them because I didn't want them to cry. I wanted to help them. I was trying to be a good person. It doesn't mean you're not grieving. I grieved a lot. I grieved with friends. I grieved in private. I grieved a lot, but I didn't like to grieve in front of my parents. So I know that concerns a lot of parents out there. They worry. And if you are seriously worried, you should probably go talk to a professional and say, look, this is what's going on. But for the most part, most siblings don't talk a lot about it. And the other thing I would say is don't worry about bringing up our brothers and sisters. It's okay to bring them up. My parents bring up Scott. They bring up memories all the time. Don't expect us to respond. Don't expect me to say, oh, Mom, thank you for talking about Scott. That was so great. Let's sit down and have a sit down. Sometimes we're not going to say anything. And that's okay. Don't have expectations about how we should respond. So,
I'm getting back. I don't know if you can hear that.
I can't.
That echo. Oh no. Well, I just wanted to say that, when anyone asks me about our daughter, including one of our children, our surviving children, that makes my heart sing. And, I love to talk about her. And I think it's such a challenge in that, we want to protect our living children from the great pain that we know in our heart, right? We don't want to see our children suffer. Right. And yet we can't protect them. And, I can't imagine what it's like from your perspective. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us tonight. But, from a parental standpoint, I want our living children to talk about our daughter. It warms my heart. So, and it's been 9 years for us, and I still would never get tired about it when they bring her name up. And so I think that, that's something that I can offer from my perspective as a bereaved parent. And so with you and your surviving sisters, you've got 2 sisters.
Yes.
How did it affect your relationships? And now that it's 35 years later, what are those relationships like?
Well, we are very, very close. We definitely, appreciate each other. We don't live near each other, but we're very close. And I think part of it was because we knew that a sibling could die suddenly. We didn't realize that. Once we realized that, it changed the way that we were. We purposely had children around the same age. We purposely tried to get pregnant together. We have children around the same age. My sister and I adopted daughters. I wanted to give my son a sibling, and I tried for many years and I couldn't, but I knew come hell or high water he was getting one. And my husband kept saying, oh, we've got one kid, it's great. I said, no, he's getting a sibling. So in 2006, my sister and I flew to China, and we adopted little girls so that our sons could have sisters.
Oh, that's beautiful.
We did it on the same day from the same province, and they're very close, the girls. I love seeing my kids together. They are very, very close, and it brings up the most positive memories of me and my brother. It is such a gift that I get every day to see my kids. I mean, I wish they knew Scott, and they do through me because I keep his memories alive. But I love seeing their sibling bonds. It's really important to me. So yeah, my sisters are very close to me. They're my best friends.
And so 35 years later, you can offer viewers who are facing sibling loss today, or who are very early into their journey, what do you want to say to them?
If you're very early into it, I would say be really kind to yourself. Don't judge your grief. Don't criticize your grief. Sometimes you might not think you're doing anything. You might think you're going to be in pain and it's going to be dark for the rest of your life. That's normal. You need to get support, though. Healing doesn't happen in a vacuum. So time doesn't just heal on its own. Please join the Compassionate Friends Sibling Loss page on Facebook. Go join groups out there. There's Facebook groups for siblings. Go to the Compassionate Friends if you want to. Find other people that have lost a sibling. Like I said, you can do it on Facebook. Then you won't feel alone. You won't feel like you're going crazy. You'll realize everything you're going through is normal. And I think that is a really big, important thing. Try not to do it on your own. Get support so that you get support, and hold on to people like me that are further down in your journey. Use us as lifelines, because I used people that were further along in their journey as lifelines early on. And my mom and I always say, because we work together at Open to Hope, we always say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and if you want to go on to Open to Hope and watch shows with Linda and people, we have radio and television, because it's another way to connect and not feel isolated and alone out there, because you're not alone.
That's right. Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing all your wisdom, and especially, tonight with it being 35 years to the day.
I'm glad I can do it. I have pure joy, and I have a wonderful life, and my brother's death has not destroyed my life. He is my guiding light. I am happy. You can eventually find joy and happiness again on your journey.
You can restore hope to your world. We are both living proof, you and I. So.
And Linda, thank you for what you're doing. I think it is so important out there. You are a lifeline to people, and it's really key. It's really important.
Thank you for being my guest tonight. How can viewers contact you If they want to know more about your class at Columbia University, or if they are looking for psychological support, or, you know, Open to Hope, how can they find you?
I have a couple of places. You can either go to opentohope.com or you can go to drheidihorsley.com.
Okay.
And those are two ways. And if you need to maybe talk to a therapist or something, I know really good people all over the country. I mean, so, you know, you might need that, you might not. So
well, I think that's important, though. They can reach out if they're looking for support as a bereaved sibling. You know, there's not a lot out there, and so I think it's important now that they have you as a poster child for you know, sibling loss, especially traumatic sibling loss. You know, look at you and all the wonderful things that you do and the beautiful life that you've created. Much of it, you know, because of how Scott's loss transformed your life, and you took that pain and turned it into purpose. Now you're a beacon of light for siblings who have had the same kind of loss, or just a loss in general. So thank you for being that for our viewers, and thank you for joining us tonight and jumping around between sibling loss and traumatic loss, and the two of them, and you know, sharing your expertise and your wisdom and your hope. So much appreciated.
It was wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Have a good night, and big hugs to you and all your family. I'll light a candle tonight for Scott.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Thanks so much, Heidi. Have a good night, and see y'all next time. Bye-bye.